Hello, everybody. Welcome to Popcorn Planet. I am Andy Signor, and it's finally time to put the Martin Scorsese Marvel movies aren't cinema debate to bed because the filmmaker himself has finally released an essay, op-ed for the New York Times, where he finally puts it all out there to explain what he meant. And I want to break it through with you because for those of you who have not read it yet, let's look through it together, go through sort of the main points, and I want to share sort of my points of where I think he's correct and also still misguided on his sort of frustrations, because he does have some very important points that I think we all should be aligned on. But I think he's misguiding his anger towards the Marvel movies when there are some other things at play that he sort of talks about. So let's get to it. For those of you who haven't read this yet, let me make this a little bigger for you as we go through it. I said Marvel movies aren't cinema. Let me explain. And he goes on and does a very big piece. I'll put the whole article down below, so if you want to read it in its entirety, you can, and then you come back. But for those of you who aren't going to read it or just want to know, when I was in England early October, I gave an interview to Empire Magazine. I was asked a question about Marvel movies. I answered it. I said that I've tried to watch a few of them and that they're not for me. They seem to be closer to theme parks than they are movies, as I've known and loved them throughout my life, and in the end, I don't think they're cinema. Some people have seasoned this last part of my answer as insulting or evidence of hatred for Marvel on my part. If anyone is intent on characterizing my words in that light, there's nothing I could do to stand in that way. He's saying that's not what I meant, but if you want to take it that way, go for it. He then goes on to sort of say that he understands there's a lot of talent behind the scenes of this, and if he had grown up younger when these movies came out, he may have developed a sense of these movies and wanted to make one himself, but that's not what he grew up with, and that's not cinema to him. The filmmakers I came to love and respect from my friends who started making movies around the same time that I did cinema with. Cinema was about a revelation, aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual revelation. It was about characters, the complexity of people, and their contradictory and sometimes paradoxical natures, and the way they can hurt one another and love one another and suddenly come face to face with themselves. It was about confronting the unexpected on the screen, and in life it dramatized and interpreted, and enlarging the sense of what was possible in the art form. And that was key for us. It was an art form. There was some debate about that at the time. So we stood up for cinema as an equal to literature or music or dance. And we came to understand that the art could be found in many different places and in just as many forms. In The Steel Helmet by Sam Fuller, Persona by Ingmar Bergman. Obviously a lot of his favorite stuff. And then he talks about Hitchcock, who he says that was his own franchise. It was our franchise. Every new Hitchcock picture was an event. To be packed an audience in one of the old theaters watching Rear Window was an extraordinary experience. It was an event created by chemistry between the audience and the picture itself, and it was electrifying. And here's where I want to pause for first, because we'll keep going, but he misses the experience of going to the movies. And no real movie does that right now except for Marvel and Star Wars. It's really hard for a movie to like sell out tickets ahead of time. People are planning that date. They're there opening night. Most other Hollywood releases, yes, the movies matter, have a pact of certain people, certain times, but it's not like sort of we're going to the movies to experience the Hitchcock movie. It's a very rare phenomenon, and I agree with him. I miss that. I think Netflix is to blame, of course. There's more opportunity, and just digital in general. There's so much content for us to watch. It's not just Marvel movies. It's YouTube. It's Twitch. It's Hulu. It's everything. No one watches content anymore on a schedule. It's very rare. Game of Thrones is sort of the last TV thing and Super Bowl, Oscars, live events. It's the last sort of, it's a dinosaur of us. There aren't any things that I feel like anybody watches network television anymore either, if you want to really argue about it. Who actually goes home at 8 to watch their show? Any network show I watch it the next day on one of the other streaming services, so I can fast forward through commercials and watch it at my leisure. It's very rare to have that sort of group experience that he's sort of clearly missing with his days of watching Hitchcock films, because back then you just didn't have Hitchcock did not have the competition that every other filmmaker has today. The landscape has changed tremendously, and so many filmmakers, including the Scorseses, who are the legends, but upstart filmmakers have such a harder shot to get their art through. And so I think it's unfair just to blame the Marvel movies. It's a lot of people to blame. It's sort of the way the world has changed, and he needs to sort of understand that. And the way he's sort of just calling out Marvel movies, that's where I sort of still think he's missing the mark. He's allowed to not like it. He's Scorsese. He can do whatever the hell he wants, but it's misguided. It's about the theater experience is clearly what he misses. Let's go back to it. In a way, certain Hitchcocks were also theme park rides, he's saying, Hitchcock films, which is fair. Strangers in Train. Climax takes place on a merry-go-round at a real amusement park. Psycho, which I saw at a midnight show on its opening day, an experience I'll never forget. People went to be surprised and thrilled, and they weren't disappointed. 60 or 70 years later, we're still watching these pictures and marveling at them. But is it at the thrills and the shock that we keep going back to? I don't think so. The set pieces in North by Northwest are stunning, but they would be nothing more than a succession of dynamic and elegant compositions and cuts without the painful emotions at the center of the story or the absolute lostness of Cary Grant's character. So again, he's saying that the Marvel actors aren't as good as Cary Grant and sort of the actors in Hitchcock's films. And I think that's unfair. I think especially to sort of today's generation, younger audiences sadly would watch Hitchcock films and say the acting is meh. They just would. I don't think that, but I think that it's sort of a testament to sort of his generation and the films of his time. They're slower. They're less exciting to certain people, sadly. It's just the way things are. We change and we grow. So, again, he's allowed to think this, but again, it's just showing sort of his age is clearly the reason why he's doing this. But I agree with this idea of who doesn't miss the theater experience. At the same time, you could argue that the theater experience now is also to blame. And I'll get to that in a minute. Let's just keep going and read his essay so we can have all his points crossed before we get there. He then goes on to even critique. Some say Hitchcock's pictures have a sameness to them, and perhaps that's true. I would argue it is. Hitchcock himself even wondered about it. But the sameness of today's franchise pictures is something else again. Many of the elements that define cinema as I know it are there in the Marvel pictures. What's not there is revelation, mystery, or genuine emotional danger. Nothing is at risk. The pictures are made to satisfy a specific set of demands, and they are designed as variations on a finite number of themes. Now, that's true. There is usually nothing at risk at these Avengers movies because they never die. The end of Infinity War was kind of great because they died, but then they brought them all back in Endgame, and now we're back to normal. And it's very rare for these characters to actually die. But then Iron Man did, and I think that was valuable. Black Widow did, but now she's got another movie coming out. So his argument about the Marvel movies not having risk, that's valid. Imagine if they killed out Iron Man in Civil War and used that to sort of move forward and had the guts to like introduce new characters and just keep going. Game of Thrones style. They don't do it. They don't do it. There is a sameness, lack of risk on some of these movies that I will give him that. He's right there. He also goes on to say, they are sequels in name, but they are remakes in spirit, and everything in them is officially sanctioned because it can't really be any other way. That's the nature of modern film franchises. Market researched, audience tested, vetted, modified, re-vetted, and remodified until they're ready for consumption. That's absolutely true. Another way of putting it would be that they are everything that the films of Paul Thomas Anderson or Claire Denis, Spike Lee, Ari Aster, Catherine Bigelow, or Wes Anderson are not. I like that he put newer, older, the good list there. And I'm sure all these filmmakers are super stoked to be on his list. When I go watch a movie by any of those filmmakers, I know I'm not going to see something absolutely new. I know I'm going to see something absolutely new and be taken to an unexpected and maybe even unnameable area of experience. My sense of what is possible in telling stories with moving images and sounds is going to be expanded. So you might ask, what's my problem? Why not just let superhero films and other franchises films be? The reason is simple. In many places around this country and around the world, franchise films are now your primary choice if you want to see something on the big screen. It's a perilous time in film exhibition, and there are fewer independent theaters than ever. The equation has flipped, and streaming has become the primary delivery system. Still, I don't know a single filmmaker who doesn't want to design films for the big screen to be projected before an audience in theaters. That includes me, and I'm speaking as someone who just completed a picture for Netflix, and it alone allowed us to make The Irishman the way we needed to. And for that, I'll always be thankful. Plug. Good Irishman plug. Don't forget Irishman in theaters. There's clearly a reason for him to do this. Someone told him, Marty, go clear up the matter so we can get press for The Irishman. We have a theatrical window, which is great. Would I like the picture to play on more big screens for a longer period of time? Of course I would. But no matter whom you make your movie with, the fact is that the screens in most multiplexes are crowded with franchise pictures. I mean, there's no Avengers movies in now. I think The Irishman would be in a lot of theaters. To me, he should be yelling at Netflix because I blame Netflix for this. The theaters won't do it, but the theaters are the reason that Irishman isn't in because they're like, well, no, the window's too short. We can't have The Irishman in because it's going to be on, so we're refusing this. Why? Have it in, as opposed to what? They really think the 8th week of what else, The Lion King or whatever hell else is in there is going to perform better than The Irishman, even if it's coming out and streaming in a few months. We're not going to know until we take risks, theater chains. And I know some of the independent theaters that are selling advanced tickets. So missed opportunity for the AMCs and the Regals to not take a movie like The Irishman and put it out there in wider distribution, even if it means it's a month on streaming. Who cares? Put it out for a week window. They do these Fathom events. I find it hard to believe that The Irishman would have been empty opening week. I would have gone. I know a lot of other people have gone, but now it's harder to find a theater that's playing it, and the theaters lost money, and the filmmakers are upset. So it's not a Marvel problem. There's no Marvel movies in cinemas right now. Netflix should have probably delayed the movie's release. They could have started the movie November 1st and then released this, I don't know, New Year's Day. It would have had the same effect. People would have still gone on Netflix to watch. And then it would have been theaters for the awards run. It made Scorsese happy. They would have been the exclusive provider for it. Why not? Why not Netflix? So to not have anger at Netflix, Marty, is unfounded. Sure, they paid for your movie. I understand you're saying it's the only way you could have made such a big, expensive movie with the effects, etc. But you're going against what you're even saying. Netflix is absolutely killing cinema, like definitively. And you're going to go after Marvel? Okay, but then you're not going to then call out Netflix too and say, no, Netflix, I need a bigger window. The window they're doing is small and not enough, and he should be more upset. He's clearly sort of saying as much as he probably can. But again, misguided. He needs to blame a lot of people if he wants to really argue for cinema and the worthiness of it. So anyway, he talks about that, and he says, so he talks about there's no, they're crowded with these pictures, and you're going to tell me, well, that's simply a matter of supply and demand and giving people what they want. I'm not going to disagree. It's a chicken and egg issue. If people are given only one kind of thing and endlessly sold out one kind of thing, of course they're going to want more of that one kind of thing. But you might argue, can't they just go home and watch anything else they want on Netflix, Hulu, iTunes? Sure, anywhere but on the big screen where the filmmaker intended his or her picture to be. Yeah. This is the big problem there. Why are you ignoring this? You're encouraging it by joining Netflix. Make a cheaper movie then and figure out how to do it cheaper. I'm sure he could have figured it out. He didn't maybe have to do the de-aging in this movie. Could have cast younger actors maybe. I don't know. In the past 20 years, as we all know, the movie business has changed in all fronts, but the most ominous change has happened stealthily and under the cover of night, the gradual but steady elimination of risk. Now I'm back with them. Many films today are perfect products manufactured for immediate consumption. Many of them are well made by teams of talented individuals. All the same, they lack something essential to cinema, the unifying vision of individual artists. Because, of course, the individual artist is the riskiest factor of all. It's true, because they could suck. They could make a mistake. I'm certainly not implying that movies should be subsidized art form or that they ever were. When Hollywood's studio system was alive and well, the tension between the artists and the people who ran the business was constant and intense, but it was a productive tension that gave us some of the greatest films ever made. In the words of Bob Dylan, the best of them were heroic and visionary. Today, the tension is gone, and there are some in the business with absolute indifference to the very question of art and an attitude towards the history of cinema that is both dismissive and proprietary, a lethal combination. The situation, sadly, is that we now have two separate fields. There's worldwide audiovisual entertainment, and there's cinema. They still overlap from time to time, but that's becoming increasingly rare. And I fear that the financial dominance of one is being used to marginalize, even belittle, the existence of the other. For anyone who dreams of making movies or who's just starting out, the situation at this moment is brutal and inhospitable to art. And the act of simply writing those words fills me with terrible sadness. So look, I agree with him there at the end. There's no risk anymore. People don't want to let filmmakers look at Star Wars. They won't let a single person lead that. Everyone blames Rian Johnson, but no, that was still done by a committee. And even when we allow a filmmaker to do it, Rian Johnson, as much as he did, and he does it wrong, he's ridiculed, and they never want to do it again. The studios don't want to take those risks. So it is a bigger problem than just Marvel movies, is what my point is. And so for him to just call out Marvel in particular, I understand where he's coming from. He's made some valid points. I agree there's lack of risk or danger in those movies, but I still think they're cinema. And those Marvel movies, they're better than a lot of the other garbage out there. They're better than Hobbs and Shaw, which was a huge letdown. They're better than, what was the other crap I just saw? Even Terminator, Dark Fate. Hello? There's a lot of stuff that's coming out that I would argue is the real problem of just people spitting out big franchise hoping pieces versus artistic cinema. So whilst Marvel isn't perfect, they've made their own gaffes, and I agree it is a little bit of a conveyor belt printing out the same sort of sequel or remake of each movie. it's a fair criticism for sure, but it's misguided because the real thing he's upset about is that there's no more smaller art films in cinema. At the same time, there are The Lighthouse, Midsummer. There have been films that are coming through, Uncut Gems. There's a bunch of stuff coming up. Jojo Rabbit. Somehow Disney let that come through, but not a typical Disney movie by any means because it was made by Fox. They slide through, and then sometimes they don't. They do still slide through, and no one wants to see them. It's not because of supply and demand, just because people don't want to pay for the theater experience for a smaller movie that they can watch at home. Some people don't think the cinema, Dolby Stereo, 4D seats is now how theaters need to have to survive, warrants a smaller independent film. And there are still people who will obviously go support it and make a little bit of money, but you need to make your cost lower, Martin Scorsese, not over $200 million or whatever it is. You got to make that back. You got to, spend less so you can sort of justify those middle movies. And it still happens from time to time, but the theater experience is the bigger problem. Be mad at the theaters. Be mad at Netflix. Why couldn't Netflix and the theaters come up with a reason to release the film in theaters? It makes no sense to me. There's no way there couldn't have been more negotiation on Netflix's part. Netflix was being greedy and stupid. Why do they need it a month after the theaters? Why? Like, you're putting it in theaters. So give it 2 or 3 months, whatever. And then theater chains, why 3 months? Who cares? Give it 2 months. If that's really not working and you realize, you know what, well, this is actually killing us, then fine, adapt. But have you tried it? You have a movie by Scorsese that's 3.5 hours long. Why not try it? They didn't. Nobody wanted to come to the table and negotiate. And so Netflix is figuring out their own model to try and appease Scorsese when they don't even care. They don't care about cinema. And that's what's so frustrating. Marvel, I think, is the only thing keeping cinema alive. If it weren't for the Marvel films doing so well, those theater chains would be going out of business. They are the ones that sort of get them through the slow months when the independent films aren't bringing in audience. So the reason they're not coming to see independent films, I think, Scorsese, is because there's too many options and the theater going experience is too expensive. And those are issues you're glossing over and ignoring to sort of shine a spotlight on Marvel movies or theme parks. Yeah, they're theme parks that you got to learn to live with because they pay the bills to justify the smaller films that do come through. My AMC showed The Lighthouse and other films. They do show independent films. So they do those, and those movies get through because they're cheap. The Irishman wasn't cheap. He wants to make Marvel budget films on an indie level. And the problem is the indie level isn't that big of an audience. They just won't go pay, $15 for a ticket in some markets and then end up spending $10 for popcorn and $10 for drink. You end up spending, if you have kids or a family, you go on a date, it ends up costing $50-$70 sometimes to go to the movies nowadays. So he's got to realize that. That's part of the problem. And so for him to sort of gloss over that frustrates me. At the same time, I think it's a well-stated thing. I understand where he's coming from his standpoint of where he grew up with cinema and what cinema means to him. That's clear. It's what cinema means to him. And he's not saying they're not talented, but he's saying they're kind of the same. And I think that's fair. There is no risk in those Marvel movies half the time, more than half the time. They are starting to feel a little cookie cutter. But I do think Ryan Coogler and others Taika Waititi have come in to be artists that are making it their own. And I hope and think that Feige and others will allow more artists to come forward and make it their own. Star Wars is the one where it's like, where's that? Where's it happening there? It's the other big theme park sort of franchise. And then Disney, to sort of who owns all the big franchise things, they're just remaking the old things, which is even worse. Why not complain about that? Aladdin, Lion King, all of those things did huge money this box office, and we're in the theaters probably longer than in some of the other movies. So I think he's correct in certain points, but still misguided in others. That said, I'm glad he said it. I think we're good. We know where he's coming from. I agree and don't agree. I see both sides on some of the points, but I think he's got to realize, and everybody should realize, it's the theater going experience. It's the theater cost. It's Netflix and every other digital platform offering us, me right here, 20 minutes of a video you just watched. Content's everywhere. We're all competing for your eyeballs and attention. So thank you for watching and making this through this far. It means a lot. I hope you've already subscribed. If you haven't, hit that subscription bell. And thank you so much for watching. And, give a like, comment to all your creators that you support. Go be nice to them. Help that out. Because, we're all here independent creators. We're all trying to get the eyeballs. And, yes, we'd all love to be screened and put into theaters. But in order to do that in this day and age, you got to be able to bring in money. And it's not about competing with Marvel. If the movie's worthy and the audience wants to go see it, they will still go see it. But you got to be worthy enough to justify a $70 trip to the movie theaters. And for a lot of people right now, No, that's hard to do when I can go zoom at home and watch it on Netflix. And Scorsese, your movie is now encouraging hundreds of thousands of people to just, you know what? I don't need to go to movies. Let me just pop on Netflix. Scorsese's movie is there. That is killing cinema more than Marvel movies are. Without Marvel movies, cinema would be dead. So what do you guys think? Tell me down in the comments below. Hit me up on social media. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back with more content soon. And I got a big announcement streaming this Thursday night, 10 p.m. Join me. I'll be talking about it, tweeting it and stuff. This Thursday night, 10 p.m. Big announcement. I hope to be able to do by then. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching and stay subscribed. Bye, everybody.